There it is. Teresa's working on it. Okie dokie, thanks everybody.
She's tough. I'm afraid now because, well, if I run over, ooh. Anyway, she's trying to save time for questions at the end, and it looks like we might have a good 15 minutes for questions if I don't blather on. Zone 6 is another big zone like the coastal prairies was. It has a lot of unique features. And if you kind of remember, the maps was kind of that big tip of Texas. So that's what we're going to be looking at. This is the South Texas brush country. And it is subtropical in some areas. So it's really kind of a very fascinating, unique area. That has the Rio Grande Valley is an ecosystem found nowhere else in the United States. It is subtropical environment, which lies further south than any other part of the United States except for Hawaii and Florida. So if you can't afford to go to Hawaii or Florida, head south to the Rio Grande and you can do some great birding down there.
The South Texas Plains covers much of what is known as the Rio Grande Valley. Beginning just south of San Antonio, this ecoregion stretches from Del Rio near the Texas-Mexico border to the city of Rockport along the Gulf Coast. The southern part of the region encompasses several major urban centers with cities like McAllen, Harlingen, and Brownsville. Known as the Brush Country for its miles of dense, thorny scrub vegetation, historically the South Texas Plains was a mixture of brushlands, riparian forests, and grasslands. Hunters know the region for producing big deer and multitudes of quail. The area is also recognized by bird watchers as a major route for neotropical migrant birds on their journey through the Central Flyway. But like many areas of the state, South Texas has suffered from land fragmentation that has significantly altered wildlife habitats. Now considered the second fastest growing urban area in the United States, many are starting to question what is happening to all the wildlife species in this region.
The Rio Grande Valley has been converted to agriculture, and as a result, most of the native brush and forest along the Rio Grande River has been converted for crops. Of late, these croplands have become very valuable urban areas. We're losing our agriculture. We have lost our habitat along the river. We have similar problems on the edges of the Rio Grande Valley, wherever large acres of the brushlands have been converted to agriculture along the coast, as well as along the Rio Grande River all the way to San Antonio.
The Rio Grande Valley has long been known for its rich production of fruits and vegetables. But even with agriculture losing ground to the ever-expanding human population, invasive plant species also impact remaining wildlife habitats.
We still have the cattle operator that's trying to make a living, and they've been pushed to go to exotic grasses like buffalo grass. Well, buffalo grass is great for grazing, it's very poor for the wildlife community. As a result, it's not only invaded the pastures they planted it to, it's grown out into the brush.
Along with urbanization, you get invasive plants. And the Rio Grande Valley is having a tremendous problem with salt cedar, which is an invasive plant. And as a result of salt cedar, increased population, and increased irrigation, the Rio Grande River actually now some years doesn't make it to the Gulf of Mexico. Historically in South Texas, there were many sable palm groves. And these old dead sable palm leaves provided great roosting spots for local bats. Unfortunately, the palms that are left in the area, which aren't many, are now being trimmed for aesthetic reasons, which is eliminating the habitat for those bats.
Invasive plants and fragmentation can change wildlife habitats anywhere. But in South Texas, one small wildcat is finding the struggle to survive much tougher. The ocelot has been on the federal endangered species list since 1972.
The ocelot, which is a very attractive spotted cat, used to range as far as Louisiana. Today, we only know of it in 3 small tracts, one at Laguna Atascosa National Wildlife Refuge and 2 private ranches. So we have a population of ocelots could be numbered into a few dozens that still exist in Texas. It's critically endangered. There are problems with isolation. These little populations are not connected, so you have a few animals that are maintaining their genetic diversity, and it's cratering because they are not exchanging DNA. So this species is hurting pretty bad.
That scar is going to be a very characteristic thing. We'll always be able to identify him.
The South Texas brushlands are not only valuable to ocelots and tropical birds, it's also very important to snakes and turtles. We have a Texas tortoise, which is unique to South Texas, and it's getting impacted by fragmentation. While a bird can fly across an open ag field, it's very hard for a tortoise to travel from block of brush to block of brush.
For the ocelot and Texas tortoise, their islands of isolation are getting smaller as the habitat becomes more fragmented.
Fragmentation divides the habitat and makes it difficult or maybe even impossible for wildlife to access necessary components of the habitat. Species like the ocelot require thick, dense, thorny scrublands, but actually over 90% of those scrublands have been lost to development or agriculture.
Texas Parks and Wildlife, along with other partners in conservation, are working with landowners to restore vital areas of the South Texas Plains ecoregion. But detrimental impacts still loom on the horizon.
Many conservation groups have pulled their efforts to put back piece by piece fragments of that forest that occurred along the Rio Grande. And we were developing a corridor that could be used by quite a bit of wildlife coming in from Mexico and also the southern limits of their range in the United States, using those tropical settings there for wildlife communities. Now we're getting a major step back with border security issues, and that's going to damage those wildlife communities that have been developed. Now we're talking about trans-Texas corridors coming through South Texas in many directions, coming out of San Antonio, coming out of Victoria, going to Brownsville, going to McAllen, cutting across from Corpus Christi to Laredo. These are 1,200-foot wide corridors, and they're going to create gaps, barriers for wildlife movement. So we're going to have fragmentation in the form of these highway transportation corridors going through the brush country in the coming years.
Challenges will continue in the South Texas Plains ecoregion as development and populations expand. But we must find a way to grow sensibly so that wildlife can coexist with us for future generations.
The Texas Wildlife Action Plan tries to address conservation issues for all wildlife we have. Within the valley, we will still try to work with the landowners and the conservation groups to restore these riparian forests along the river. In areas where we have dense thorn scrub, which may be favorable for ocelot, we're going to try to connect these patches together with some form of brush corridor so the ocelots can travel between those without getting run over by a vehicle or getting killed by some form of predation.
Like the Gulf Coast, South Texas enjoys the economic benefits of nature tourism. There's tremendous economic growth, and it's essential for communities to work together for the benefit of wildlife and wildlife habitat.
As they pointed out, ecotourism for birding is very, very important there, just like it is along the Gulf Coast. Along the Rio Grande, there's a collection of small sites called the World Birding Center. We're going to take a look at one of the major ones. But you'll also, I'm giving you a vocabulary word here. Does anyone here know what a resaca is? Okay, somebody nodded yes. Shall I give you the microphone? Resacas are former channels of the Rio Grande. So you can, it would be dependent upon rainfall to fill them in. So it would be areas for wetland birds that would be dependent upon the rainfall. And remember where that rainfall map is. The brush country runs somewhere in the 30 range of annual rainfall. So let's look at some birds.
Can you see that snowy egret? Yeah, and can you see its legs?
Way down in South Texas, there's a place where you can go to see birds.
Yeah, its feet are yellow and its legs are black.
Lots of birds.
This is Estero Llano Grande State Park in Weslaco, Texas. Part of the World Birding Center.
One on the left is probably a Couch's or a tropical kingbird.
And there's a laced grebe in the middle of the pond. No.
The World Birding Center consists of 9 sites throughout the Rio Grande Valley. 3 of those are state parks.
I'd like to welcome you all to Estero Llano Grande State Park.
Here you can see birds in a tree, birds on the water, birds on a wire, and birds on a nest.
In the park, we have approximately 216 bird species recorded. On just a regular day, you can sit on this deck for an hour or two and easily spot 30 to 40 species of birds.
All of these birds come to Estero Llano Grande because there is a lot of different habitat in a little bit of area.
We have shallow wetlands, deep wetlands, woodlands, thorn scrub.
The diverse habitat brings in the diverse species, and that's really important to have here in South Texas. Diversity begets diversity.
This is what the fullest compared to the black-bellied, which we saw a lot of.
What have we seen today? Black-bellied whistling duck, black-necked stilts, beautiful views of Asura today. For us eastern birders, these are southern specialties.
Not all of the residents of Estero Llano Grande have wings. The birds share the space with a variety of animals, some slow, some slithery, and some substantially sizable.
Yes, we do have a few alligators. They're a major attraction, and we're hoping that really pulls in some of the locals because they're really interested and often come just to see the alligators and walk out of the park.
We do have a family of alligators that live out here, 2 adults.
So many people in the valley haven't heard of this park. It's often that you forget about the things that are closer to you and you travel to go see these amazing things.
See them, they'll be swimming out here, getting some air.
We're starting to teach them by these school groups. They're quite amazed at what is right here in their backyards. There's something for everybody here at our park.
Okay, we're up to Zone 7, which is kind of a favorite, I think, of everybody. It's your Edwards Plateau and Llano Uplift. And, of course, Texas Hill Country, where we all love to go and see the bluebonnets, sits on top of that Edwards Plateau. So this area is basically your geology lesson all over again. That inland sea and all of its deposits, the volcanic uplifting and that, created this area where you have lots of steep canyons and springs, and one of the world's underlying limestone is your Edwards Aquifer, which takes up a good portion of Texas. Many of you may not know just how big that thing is. So you have lots of holes and caves, so you no longer have prairie land, you just sort of have this underground area. This is also where you have, remember that granite uplifts. You have enchanted rocks. That's a state park that you can go visit and clamber up this great giant dome that you talked about in geology. Here's a map of the Edwards Aquifer. You can see how much area that it does cover. This is one of the most prolific artesian aquifers in the world. It is generally recharged by direct precipitation. So when it rains here in Texas, we recharge that aquifer. And it runs into those tiny little holes and down those little canyons. So you are bound to find some very unique species in the Edwards Plateau area. So again, as that sea, remember the sea came in and out, it laid down a lot of seabed there. And the rocks that compose the Edwards Trinity Aquifer are generally limestone in the upper part and sandstone in the lower part. The rock dips and thickens to the southeast. The thickness of the aquifer ranges from just a few tens of feet to over 1,000 feet deep. So this is a very important aquifer feature, one of two in Texas. Some regional wildlife that you might be interested in is the golden-cheeked warbler. Guess which one he is? The black-capped vireo, your Mexican free-tailed bat, and the Barton Springs salamander. And guess what? The Barton Springs salamander, yes, indeed, is endangered because of the aquifer being drained.
We're at Balcones Canyonlands National Wildlife Refuge, where we have the endangered black-capped vireo, and here we're studying their reproductive success. This species builds its nests about 3 to 4 feet off the ground in shrubs or small trees. The nests typically have 3 to 4 young in them. These chicks are about 2 days old. They're totally reliant on their parents. Here you can see both birds at the nest. You can see they look a little different. The mom has a gray cap, the dad has a dark black cap, hence the name black-capped vireo. This is something people may find gross, but the chicks produce their poop in a little sack that's kind of like a diaper with the poop in it. Both parents will either eat the sack or carry it away from the nest and dispose of it to keep the nest clean. These chicks will grow about 800% over the course of the next 10 to 12 days before they fledge. Under optimum conditions, they'll continue to breed throughout the summer, and if everything works out, they can actually produce up to 2 successful broods in 1 year. This species is endangered, but we're creating a lot of habitat on the refuge and elsewhere, and with continued success, we may see that this species recovers and is able to be taken off the endangered species list sometime in the future.
Now, besides how they handle poop, that 3 to 4 feet when you're out hiking, especially as we're going into fall and winter, kind of keep your eye around that 3 or 4 feet. We were out hiking at Lake Louisville, and we found a vireo nest, that nice little pouch. It's most likely going to be your red-eyed vireo, but not the black-capped. But it's very exciting when you do find one of those, like, woohoo, I'm a naturalist.
There are few places left that have not been largely touched by our culture. But at Kickapoo Caverns State Park, nature is almost untouched, the way it used to be.
It's a great place to just get away from it all. You can unplug from all the distractions in the city. We've got approximately 6,400 acres and lots to do. We've got birding, hiking, mountain biking. It's just a great place to get away from it all and just get back in touch with nature.
See the scrub jays?
Much of the beauty of Texas is hidden. To see it, you have to work for it, sometimes catching only a fleeting glimpse.
Way back in those
Over 230 species of birds have been seen in this park.
We get a lot of birders from all over the country. They've read about it. We've got a lot of diversity here, and they're here a lot of times to fill their life list, whether they're looking for the black-capped vireo or the golden-cheeked warbler. We've got them both here, so it's a great place for birding.
Jessica Klassen is a graduate student at Texas A&M University, studying the endangered golden-cheeked warbler.
All right, Here is one of our golden cheek warbler nests. They make their nests out of the strips of ash juniper bark. So the little clump up there of ash juniper that you see at the canopy of the tree is our golden cheek warbler nest, and directly below it is you'll see our camera that we're using to monitor the nest with. But we like to disturb them as little as possible, so we stay at the nest site for as short a period as possible.
By using an infrared camera and remote recording unit, Jessica is able to monitor the bird nest without disturbing it.
We've been seeing nestling type behavior, so we've seen both males and females carrying food, which we can infer would be to hungry nestlings in a nest.
Enter the darkness of the subterranean wonder of Kickapoo Cavern and witness roughly 4 million years of nature's artistic handiwork.
If y'all see this formation, it's pretty cool.
This is what you call being deep in the heart of Texas.
You got twin columns. One column on your right is the largest column in the state of Texas. It's 80 feet high, which is a little over 8 stories. You can see the different colored drapery off of it, all the jellyfish looking stuff. I see Mother Nature at its best. Little miracle.
The intrigue of the park lies as much above the ground as below. Stewart Bat Cave teams with Mexican free-tailed bats.
The bat flights are pretty spectacular. They are 500,000 bats here at the cave. It takes approximately an hour and a half for all the bats to get out of the cave.
In our ever-expanding, fast-paced world, it's wonderful to know a place like Kickapoo Cavern State Park exists.
It's a really beautiful place, and we're trying to keep it that way. We're trying to keep it as natural as possible. It's a great place to just get away from it all and enjoy a part of Texas a lot of people have never seen.
Hour and a half for the bats to fly out. They're not endangered. Well, they are, but... We're now going to go up to the Panhandle. That's that wonderful little flat area. The Panhandle of Texas is basically both the rolling plains and the high plains. It's, as you learned in geology, the two are separated by that caprock escarpment. It's all part of the Great Plains going on up into the U.S., so again, we don't stay within our borders. So this is mostly flat. It's a grassy plain. The western and eastern parts have some interesting and striking canyons that have been developed by the rivers. Remember, this is the area where the rivers start. One of the, some people don't know this, but the Palo Duro Canyon is the second largest canyon in the U.S. And it's quite a sight, so I'm going to take you there, and then I'm going to take you to Caprock Canyons, just for fun.
If you've driven across the Texas Panhandle, it's like basically driving on the world's largest billiard table. Everything is flat, and then we get to Palo Duro Canyon and the bottom just drops out of it. Whenever you see it, it makes an impact. I saw it myself 12 years ago for the first time, and it just floored me. All these things behind me are not mountains. They're the edge of the rim of the canyon. We're 800 feet below the level of the ground.
When you come into the park,
look.
You see something?
Like a wood house.
All you see is grassland, farmland.
See, if you come right here.
And they just can't believe that this is here. And when you start down to the bottom of it, it's just awesome.
If you come over here, you kind of have a good view. Whoa, there's wood.
That's where the Civilian Conservation Corps came in here to build the buildings, to make the roads. And what was so interesting about that, where the CCC units camped, that was a tent city down there.
It's amazing, especially the caves.
When I do bus tours, I can hear people in the back going, "Oh my, look at that!" So they're always real surprised because this opens up.
The canyon system itself is over 120 miles long and over 20 miles wide. The canyon has been sacred to mankind ever since they started living here 12,000 years ago. They considered it to have magic powers. The Comanche Nation still holds it as a sacred place. But we're the second largest canyon in the country. The Grand Canyon is nice to stand on the edge and go, that's a great canyon. Here, you can get into the canyon and you can become part of it. You're surrounded by the canyon and you can go, I'm the only person on earth right now because there's nothing around me.
Oh, it's great. It's about 25 miles from Amarillo. It's the second largest canyon in the United States. You've got the scenery, you're outdoors, lots of wildlife, and it's just beautiful down here.
This is just such a beautiful place. I was asked one time, how do you feel when you're in here? And I said, there are days when you're just kind of down, you think, oh man, and you come in, I just take a drive. I drive through the canyon, and I said, it just lifts my spirit. You know, you look at this beautiful thing that's here, how can you not feel better after seeing that?
I'm at Caprock Canyon State Park. We're the home of the official state of Texas bison herd. These are Southern Plains bison that for thousands of years have roamed this area. They're like people, they have different personalities. You'll have an animal that's real curious, that'll want to come up to you and kind of see what's going on. Then you'll have some that want to stay back and don't want to be a part of it. This bison herd was started by Charles Goodnight back in the 1870s during the slaughter of the American bison. They were slaughtering millions of these animals, and Mrs. Goodnight would listen to the calves bleat in the nighttime, so they rounded up a few calves, and that was the beginning of the herd, and they've been here at Caprock Canyons ever since. When they're agitated, they will raise their tail into a question mark. I don't know if you've ever heard the saying, let's hightail it out of here. That came back from the 1870s. When the settlers would see those tails go up in that question mark, they knew it was time to get out of the way. They make a deep guttural grunt that's pretty unique. A bison can run 35 miles an hour. It's pretty fast. It may look like they're big, huge, lumbering animals, but they are very nimble, very fast. So our goal is to expand their territory here in the park and have a unique experience to where when you come in the park, you are in the habitat with the bison. So come on out to Caprock Canyon State Park and experience the Old West, where you can see scenic views, wild bison, mule deer, and wide open spaces.
Even the bison couldn't handle that last one. I do miss having the bison out at Lake Louisville because they are fast. Interesting animals. So now we're going to go up to Zone 9, the high plains. You're almost there. You've almost toured all of Texas today. This is one of the largest, flattest plains in the U.S. It's, like I said, again, it's part of the Southern Plains. This is historically a short grass prairie. Not the tall grass like the Blackland prairie, but a short grass and mixed prairie. It was once home to herds of buffalo, pronghorn antelope, gray wolves, grizzly bears, and elk. Now it's home to sandhill crane, kit fox, and lesser prairie chicken. The movie I'm going to show you is going to go back into the other two prairie chickens. In case, Atwaters, you just thought there was one, didn't you? The Playa Lakes are only about 2% of the area up there, but they are the most interesting of this big flat plain. Playas are shallow, circular-shaped wetlands that are primarily filled by rainfall. This is a relief map that shows you very, very clearly what that large, flat, and what that escarpment, how it separates. The other major feature of Zone 9 is the fact that it holds the tail end of the Ogallala Aquifer, one of the largest aquifers in the U.S. the playas up there. It depends upon the rainfall. But when wet years, it's a great environment for the plants to support dabbling ducks. You heard that I said that there were sandhill cranes there. That's where they go. It's also, these playa lakes are also important for the crops, and like the rainfall in the Edwards Plateau, these playa lakes help recharge our portion of the Ogallala Aquifer. So minding that area up there is extremely important.
These birds are just so unique and wonderful. The way the males display, it's just awesome to watch.
Yeah, God was feeling very flamboyant when he came up with the prairie chicken's means of reproduction. Now some of this right here dove looks pretty good. Nice.
For the prairie chickens?
Yeah. See, and it goes all the way around the ridge over there.
Which is excellent.
Correct.
It may look like Jeff Bonner and Dub Jester are just sightseeing here in the Texas Panhandle, but they're here for a reason. They're looking for leks.
And that's the windmill over there where we turned by, the one on the horizon, where the lek is just over the hill?
Yeah.
A lek is the breeding ground for the lesser prairie chicken. It's where the males gather to strut their stuff in hopes of finding a mate. Finding the leks is key to finding what few birds live here on this Panhandle ranch.
This is primo looking chicken stuff here.
The Martinez Ranch is a working cattle ranch. The grazing contractor is Jay O'Brien from Amarillo, and I manage the wildlife program. The entire ranch consists of about 7,500 acres, and it's very diversified terrain. We have a real good population of Rio Grande turkey that winter roost here, and we also have lots of white-tailed deer.
There is also a small population of lesser prairie chickens on the ranch, and that's why Jeff Bonner is here.
But this is the kind of stuff that they love, man.
Jeff is a wildlife biologist with the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. He's here at Dub's request to give him advice on how to better manage the land for lesser prairie chickens.
Here in Donnelly County, they're pretty sparse, and it's pretty much relative to the quality of the habitat that they have.
3 kinds of prairie chickens once occurred in Texas, but populations of all 3 have declined drastically in the last century. The greater prairie chicken once roamed from the Blackland Prairie northward through the Great Plains and into Canada. Today, they're found only in a patchwork of prairie states. Texas is not one of them. The range of the lesser prairie chicken is also significantly smaller than it once was. In Texas, small pockets of birds are found only in the northeastern corner of the Panhandle and west of Lubbock, along the New Mexico border. The best known of the prairie chickens is the Atwaters. Found only in Texas, these birds once inhabited 6 million acres of coastal prairie. Prior to the 20th century, the population may have been close to 1 million birds. Today, that population is close to extinction.
This is a slow process of 2 things: direct loss of habitat due to conversion of native prairies and degradation of native habitats. So it's not a question of there not being enough open space lands, but it's current land use.
Located 60 miles due east of Amarillo, the Martinez Ranch is typical of much of the Panhandle landscape. It's operated primarily as a cattle ranch, but the grazing habitat is also ideal wildlife habitat.
Well-managed ranches that are properly stocked and managed well generally have very good wildlife habitat. In fact, they're some of our very best examples of good wildlife habitat across the country.
I don't think you'll find a cattleman who's not very interested in the overall ecology of his ranch, and that includes wildlife. Of course, grass is our major concern because it's what cattle convert into feed. I don't know a rancher who's not interested in helping wildlife and improving wildlife habitat on his ranch, as long as they see that nobody's going to be dictating exactly how they should do their business.
Chickens are relatively intolerant of tall vertical structures. Once you get brush encroachment of relatively tall brush, they'll tend to leave an area.
Raising awareness about the declining state of the lesser prairie chicken is the first step towards reversing that trend. With that in mind, the Martinez Ranch hosted a field day to bring panhandle landowners together with conservation professionals.
We have to let people know that there is a problem, but that we don't have all the answers, and that we truly do need the help and cooperation of landowners to be willing to participate with us and try some things and let us improve our understanding of what we think lesser prairie chickens need.
Texas A&M graduate student Eddie Lyons is studying lesser prairie chickens in Yoakum County, southwest of Lubbock.
We're trapping them, fitting them with radio transmitters so we can monitor their movements and locations. That's where he is right now. We want to study their nest success, survival, mortalities, what kills them when they're killed by predators. And we're also looking at their habitat use.
Eddie has been granted unrestricted access to 12,000 acres of sandy, brushy land, most of it leased by the June Leland Wildlife Foundation.
We're looking for a bird that has died. The signal was given a mortality signal. And so when we hear the mortality signals, we walk in, locate the collar, and retrieve it.
We have very little public land in the Panhandle. The work that we're doing here couldn't get done, wouldn't be done, without the cooperation of the landowners.
And here's the remains of a bird. We have the wings present, but not just a pile of feathers. So I would say this is probably a raptor kill. The collar is around here, right here. One more bird gone, but that's part of it.
Lesser prairie chickens, like many other species, have not been disappearing all on their own. They've had a lot of help. Destroying the habitat is easy. Fixing it, well, that's another story. But if we can find more people who view the prairie chickens as something worth saving, perhaps there is a glimmer of hope after all.
The habitat is in the hands of private landowners, then really the future of the prairie chicken is really in the hands of those landowners, and it's really up to them. And so I love getting those calls of people calling with interest in prairie chickens.
I've developed a passion for the chickens in the fact that they're such an interesting bird. We don't know that they might become extinct, and it's important that we do all we can to protect the birds right now.
Our last zone. Now, I'm sure they're going to give you a test, so you better be able to name those 3 prairie chickens. We're going out to the Trans-Pecos, number 10, out there where there's only, in some areas, 14 inches of rain. It varies because this is where we have our mountains. The largest, tallest mountain is, of course, Guadalupe Peak. On top of just breathtaking, if you've ever gone out to see the Chizos or the Guadalupes, I mean, it's just absolutely gorgeous. The majority of this ecosystem, though, is taken up by the Chihuahuan Desert, which is a rather I think about 50% of this region is the northern end of the Chihuahuan Desert. So you have a variety of soils depending upon where you are on the mountain, where you are in the valley, and these deserts, and of course, grasslands are out there.
The wide open landscape of West Texas includes miles of grasslands, mountain ranges, and thorny desert scrubland. Known as the Trans-Pecos ecoregion, geographically this area covers over 32,000 square miles and begins just west of the Pecos River. The region borders the state of New Mexico to the north and the international border of Mexico to the south and southwest, which encompasses the Big Bend State and National Parks. The biodiversity here is rich due to the unique convergence of biotic communities such as the Edwards Plateau, Great Plains, and Rocky Mountains. But approximately 50% of the Trans-Pecos is represented by the northern portion of the Chihuahuan Desert.
The Chihuahuan Desert, which is our main biotic community, is a relatively new desert. It's only about 10,000 years old. And actually has fairly low amounts of endemism, which means species that actually developed here in the Chihuahuan Desert. However, there are a couple categories of organisms, cacti are one of them, that have high degrees of endemism. That is, a lot of unique species that are found nowhere else in the world except in the Chihuahuan Desert.
The Trans-Pecos remained largely unsettled until the mid-1800s. With the establishment of military outposts, Spanish settlements, and eventually the Texas and Pacific Railroad, the seemingly endless supply of grasslands and natural springs invited new industries to West Texas: ranching and agriculture. But human impacts began taking their toll on the ecoregion. Grasslands were degraded, rivers diverted, and springs began running dry.
The major cause for the dewatering or drying up of some of the really major, just world-class springs that occurred in the Trans-Pecos was tapping of the groundwater for development of agriculture. And that started in the very early part of the 20th century. And the impacts of that was that they drew down the aquifers to the point where they no longer could support the surface discharge of these large springs.
In fact, the drying up of Comanche Springs near Fort Stockton in 1955 landed the Comanche Springs pupfish on the federally endangered species list just a few short years later in 1967. Now, it's only found in San Solomon Springs near Balmorhea. While water continues to be a big concern for this environment, familiar threats in other areas of Texas, such as oil and gas production, as well as the introduction of wind harvesting, are also leaving their mark on the Trans-Pecos.
We've had wind farm exploration and research in the Trans-Pecos ecological region for several years now. However, the big push to really generate farms and put a lot of towers up occurred probably in about the last 5 years. One of our concerns, obviously, is the potential impacts to bighorn sheep. Our desert bighorn sheep population is doing extremely well in Texas now, and we would like to keep it that way. Another concern that we have in the Trans-Pecos is the fact that historically much of this country was grassland or savanna. Within the last 100 years, we've had a tremendous amount of brush encroachment. We're working with partners such as the Nature Conservancy to try to implement more of a prescribed burn policy, work with private landowners on a much larger scale in implementing prescribed burn plans for their properties.
Using fire for brush control depends heavily on the weather in this arid ecoregion. But well-managed use of prescribed burns continues to grow. Other successful partnerships are helping wildlife in the Trans-Pecos as well.
One of the things we're most proud of is our partnership with the Natural Resource Conservation Service in not only creating but implementing a Trans-Pecos resource area. It primarily targets the desert grasslands and with a species of concern, the pronghorn antelope. And through our cooperation with NRCS and working with landowners, our participation has exceeded all expectations. It's a fantastic example of us doing good work for the resource on the ground through partnerships with private landowners.
One species in particular that has greatly benefited from conservation partnerships is the endangered Aplomado falcon. After a successful reintroduction of the bird to the Texas coast, a program operated and managed by the Peregrine Fund was extended to the Trans-Pecos, where the Aplomado had practically disappeared.
Population-wise, we're talking about a species that was extirpated, went right to the floor, zero. And now, after a half dozen years or so of restoration work, of actually releasing captive bred birds, we're starting to see a very slow and incremental generation of a wild population. It's probably less than 50 birds at this point, but we're very hopeful that once again this is going to become a bird that Texans can look forward to seeing on the landscape of the Trans-Pecos.
The Trans-Pecos remains the least impacted of all ecoregions within the state. But biologists and conservation-minded landowners alike understand that title doesn't come without a continued vigilance in doing what's best for the region.
I think that through the priorities outlined in the Texas Wildlife Action Plan, our goal is to go ahead and keep that pristine value we all cherish in the Trans-Pecos. And the truth is, a lot of Texans come out to the Trans-Pecos primarily to escape and to get away, and we want that to continue, for this to be a refuge for not only wildlife but also people as well.
We're not done yet. That is the end of each individual zone, but I do have one more video for you. But hopefully now you've got a good idea of the overall scope that Texas Parks and Wildlife has to deal with. Some individual problems in areas, but a lot of it is good land management or coping with the change as to how land use has changed. And some familiar things now when you hear about a prescribed burn or water conservation, those types of things, you have a much larger view of why it's important. I think the most shocking thing I heard out of all of these videos was some years the Rio Grande doesn't make it to the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, that's that big river that goes all the way along our border, and we're using too much water. So as your reward, I have the funnest video, pardon me. This is the Texas mascot, and we're going to now,
They're a symbol of the American West and a symbol of our independence and uniqueness.
If you were picking a mascot for the state of Texas, you'd have to consider one small reptile with a legendary reputation.
They are the state reptile of Texas.
The Texas horned lizard. But you'd better hurry. While they're known by many names,
Horned toads, horned frogs, but they're actually horned lizards.
Horned lizard numbers are shrinking.
This particular ant mound was just discovered this year, this spring.
These folks aren't looking for ants as much as answers.
If there's horned lizards in the area, this is the kind of place I would see them coming back to.
In many places they once lived, horned lizards have vanished.
It's just kind of sad to think that something that was at one time as common as the horned lizard in Texas is getting to a point where you just hardly see them, even when you look for them.
As we go out and visit with ranchers, it's one of the first things they ask us, what's happened to the horned lizards?
That question has biologists scrambling to study them in the places they're still doing well.
Up in the southeast panhandle, Texas horned lizard still very common in this part of the state.
Chip Ruthven has been chasing horned lizards for many of his years in the field.
We catch most of our horned lizards simply by driving down the roads and encountering them on the roads. You are not, oh, there he goes.
While they're not normally hard to catch,
Where did you go?
they are well camouflaged.
There he is. We have a mark recapture program. We'll capture those animals temporarily, collect a variety of data off of them, weights, measurements. We'll take the clip, kind of clip it on the base of one horn, and then lift the lizard up, and there we got a weight of 25 grams. Capture the GPS coordinates of each lizard where we caught them, and then mark those individuals. 116 millimeters total length. We've marked over 1,000 here on this management area.
For the lizards, marking means a rather severe pedicure.
Flip over 2R toe. They get around pretty good without a toe or two.
Clipping specific toe combinations identifies each lizard, and those lost toes serve another purpose.
I will mail it off to TCU and they will do their genetic work on it.
Texas Christian University is receiving horn-toed toes and other samples in the mail these days.
I thought it would be a natural because it's TCU's mascot.
The lizard lab work happens here, supervised by Dean Williams.
Here's some more samples from Chet, Richard.
Dean and his students are extracting DNA from cells to learn just how genetically unique horned lizard populations are around the state.
What we have found so far is that they do seem to be highly genetically variable, at least in the matador. Populations that may have particularly low genetic variation that might indicate, okay, that population is experiencing problems right now.
This genetic information will also be critical if horned lizards are ever to be restored to places where they have disappeared. Other research to prepare for that possibility is happening nearby at the Fort Worth Zoo.
So how are the horned lizards doing? Doing very well on their diets? Good.
Diane Barber and her staff are successfully keeping horned lizards at the zoo, and they're learning how to make more.
We're one of the few institutions that have ever bred them in captivity. Looks like she's not interested today. We'll have to try again tomorrow. They're a hard creature to keep alive because of their specialized diet and their light requirements.
While captive breeding may help restore populations down the road, keeping horned lizards healthy in the wild still means having a better understanding of what they eat and where they live. And some of the places they live may surprise you.
We have an isolated population of horned lizards on this coastal barrier island. Okay.
Ashley Inslee works for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Leanne Lynham and a group of volunteers have come to Matagorda Island to help with her research.
One thing we're trying to do is to understand something about these populations that are still left, if there are certain reasons they've managed to hang on, and what that could tell us about conservation and maybe restoration of horned lizards.
On the island, the crew hits the road, looking for lizards. And they have a large area to cover.
It's a long, narrow strip of land that these horned lizards inhabit. Almost 40 miles long. And we can check it when we get up there. Yeah. See if we've got any critters. So far today, we haven't caught anything.
Traps have been set, but have nothing to offer.
I got a grasshopper.
So the spotters scan the roadsides from shore to shore.
I see one stop.
And eventually,
All right, let's go.
they find a lizard.
Beautiful. So it's 76.72.
As in the panhandle,
We're going to take the third toe.
the lizard loses a digit,
Put some neosporin on it
this time to analyze its diet.
to get an isotopic reading from this guy.
This DNA sample is somewhat less invasive.
This swab.
To our human mind, it's a little insulting.
But this lizard's big day is not over yet.
So I'll put some super glue. We are going to powder track her. So we are going to attach the fur patch. And what we do is we coat it with a fluorescent powder, release it, then in the evening we can go back and with a black light track the horned lizard and see specifically what grasses they're using, if they're using a path, if they're frequenting certain ant mounds. as opposed to others.
There you go.
So it's really been a convenient, efficient way to gauge the habitat that they are using.
Well, the fire ants, pesticide use, those are probably compounding factors. The significant reason for the decline in the Texas horned lizard is probably habitat loss.
Not marked, so he'll be a new one to collect some data off of.
Studying horned lizards in their natural habitat may be the only way to keep them from fading into history.
Toe clip code 2R7L.
Though there remain more questions than answers about the long-term health of horned lizards, it's clear they still have some friends.
Here's that the toad is still alive. It's a horny toad.
I don't think there's anybody that doesn't like a horned toad.
It's a horny toad.
It's kind of like the mascot of Texas. You don't have to get folks excited about horned lizards because they love them already.
They got an ugly face. He's a little horny toad.
You know what they eat?
Ants.
Ants. Almost 80% of their diet is harvester ants.
Wow.
A little interest can go a long way towards saving a threatened species.
I guess you could close them up and put them in the freezer.
That genetic study at TCU is funded by sales of horned lizard license plates.
This is the second tiny one today.
Volunteers collect valuable information around the state.
Adorable.
Once you see your first horned lizard and you realize how imminent their demise could be, you can't help but try to get involved and try to do something.
We've got 20% grasses.
The study and preservation of native habitat continue.
Bottom line is to determine practices to manage habitats for horned lizards.
And what helps the horned lizard will almost certainly help other wildlife.
There's a lot of other species, too, that maybe are not as popular or well-known as horned lizards, but they face the same plight.
What's going to benefit horned lizards is going to benefit most grassland species.
Let him go on his merry way. Live long and prosper and raise lots of baby horny toads.
Get involved in citizen science to help horned lizards. Contact the Texas Horned Lizard Watch Program.
So there you go. You've toured Texas. Are you tired? Did you learn a little bit? That's why I gave you these web links. You can go look at some of these videos. You can go on to the nature trackers. Around here, if you find a turtle, a box turtle, you need to report his whereabouts. They're interested in keeping those tracked. Some of the projects you just do because you're a good person, and some of the projects we actually have citizen scientist projects, so you need to go look at your project list. There's an amphibian watch, bumblebee watch, hummingbird, Texas hummingbird roundup. Some of these require a class before, and then you know how to fill out the form and do that type of thing. Like I said, Mr. Rob Roy back there, if we are real sweet to him, he might do another land management class. We have to sometimes talk nice to him. Or in my case, I walk up and tweak his ear. Your historic sites, you saw a lot of movies from the various historic sites. I recommend you look at those. They're just, if you're interested in them, they're fascinating. So, we did so good. We got 20 minutes for questions, and I hope I can answer them. I'll do my best. Anybody have any questions or want to review or whatever? Yes, ma'am. The bison, she asked about the bison at the Leela area and why they aren't there anymore. They were being very careful about making sure that they were a genetically pure bison, and the herd needed to go elsewhere to have friends. Does that?
There's a little more to it than that.
Yeah.
The drought really constricted
Yeah.
where they were able to graze, and they couldn't graze enough.
Right. Yeah, they didn't go very far away, but they may come back when we have a little more grazing area for them. But they were quite handy out there because, remember, Lake Louisville, Leela, is in that cross timbers that has that iron curtain. And the gentleman who ran the program, he said, yeah, he says, I wasn't about to cut all that down. I used to just run the herd through there, and they made nice holes for me because they can do it. They can do it. So, yeah, but I miss them. They used to take kids out and show them the bison, and you can hear them grunt. There are a few, like, single animals around, but he was trying to keep a genetically intact American herd, much like up at Caprock Canyon.
There used to be some on 3040 in Louisville, corner of 3040 and maybe Duncan.
There's bison around, but they have to genetically test them to see if they are beefalo. Yeah, beefalo, if they've been out partying late at night, not using protection. Yes, ma'am.
When can you go see the Kemp Ridley sea turtles when they release them?
They do different releases. I suggest that you look up the Padre Island National Seashore, and they should have some release dates for you. It does vary. A lot of these things, like if you noticed on one of those, I believe it was Caddo Lake, she suggested you come during the dogwood season. It was one of those. So if you start watching those videos, you kind of mark on your calendar, I need to go. Just like you go down to the South Texas during fall or spring migration. That's when you're going to see the most birds. So in my head, I can't keep it all straight. But usually I make a list. I know it's getting close to October. So Hagerman National up on Lake Texoma, the snow geese are going to start arriving there sometime in October. And so if you ever want to go stand in a snow globe and watch the geese just squawk and squirrel all over you, last year it was hard. They had the government shut down just as they were planting the fields with the winter rye for them, and they didn't get it in the ground soon enough. So when they came, they didn't have enough food, so the first few flocks moved on. So our drought is affecting monarchs right now, government doing ridiculous things, interferes with crop planting for the geese, so, you know, it all impacts them. So I usually look up every year, just because you don't know what's going on in that region. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Way in the back.
Way in the back. I was in the class of 2013.
How'd I do?
You did great.
Okay.
Matter of fact, you got me interested in going down to South Texas, and I saw my first green jay.
Ooh, green jay.
And it was just awesome. So I want you to know that I was listening, and I actually went and visited some of the places that you went.
I think I promised her class, we were going off on a trip. And I don't know if that was the first class or the second class, that I was going off on a trip, and my one goal was to see a purple gallinule. So I had to go over to Louisiana to do it, but that's okay. We won't tell anybody. But it was like, I was like, oh yeah, sure, I'm going to see this bird. I'm standing there, I'm just looking, and I'm looking, trying to get a photograph of a water lily because, hey, there was no birds. And out comes a purple gallinule, plod, 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 plodding slow enough right in front of where I was focused so I got his picture. I went, oh, I'm good. I'm going to go back and I'm going to tell the class, yeah, I tracked it into the swamp. So yeah, you've got to be out there to see it, and whatever your passion is, go for it. Hopefully you've learned about a few new things, like, did you know we had ocelots? There's another little cat Who knows about Jaguarundi? She knows about Jaguarundi. This is like a little large gray puffy cat, and he's even more endangered than the ocelot, if you can believe that. I think they're down to 8, something horrible, because of habitat loss. So this major whole thing is basically water and habitat loss.
Where do they live?
Down around where the ocelot lives, down in that brush country. They like to crawl up in little caves, but again, the population got into just one little tiny pocket, and it's not genetically viable anymore. Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell me on the map, are you familiar with Boca Chica?
Uh-huh.
I just read an article on it, but I had a hard time placing it where it actually is. Vaguely, like within a 600 square foot line. That's where that SpaceX program is putting in their launch site. That's gonna.
Yeah.
No, not this. This is Boca Chica. This is a different. It's not near Waco. It's on the coast because it's going to affect the sea turtles.
Yeah, it's down right about where Padre Island, I believe, is. I'm horrible at geography. It's down there. I'm sure they're sitting on them to make, but the coastline is like anything else. It's a balance of need, and the fact that the tip of the brush country is the second fastest growing in the U.S. Did you all let that one sink into your brain? Second fastest growing area in the whole of the U.S. Is that very delicate, and they're producing our fruits and vegetables here in Texas.
They actually said it's probably going to be one of the best things that can happen for the population because just like Johnson Kennedy or the Kennedy Space Center, there's going to be such a protected area around it that it will protect the private land and stop it from being developed into anything else.
Right. There's a big concern about the wind farms because, again, that will be habitat interruption, just like pipelines and the big roadways that they're planning. So we have to think about those things. You can't stop progress, but hopefully we can engage in attempting to do some smaller projects like they talk about putting those small little areas, patchworking them back together so you've got corridors. Around here, I've worked before with the Army Corps of Engineers around Lake Louisville, and when they talk about keeping the wildlife corridor around the lake and homeowners wanting to mow and put grass in, that seems to be one of the major fights because people don't understand how important that little narrow corridor can be. They've got to be able to get safely around the lake or across freeways, things like that. So we have a lot of projects here that you can all work on that will just put back a little tiny piece, just little bit by bit, like the whooping cranes. They went down to 15. Now they're back to 200. So every little bit helps. The Ablamado falcon, they've got them going again. They went to 0. So you never give up hope. It can be sometimes daunting, but you never give up hope. Anything else? Yes?
In the long term, they talk as if you've got to have that genetic diversity. And when you get down to this tiny little one, you were saying that like 8 was not really genetically diverse enough this area. Have you ever thought about trying to do some mutations or just looking at something that's not going to be viable because it's just too genetically?
She's asking about genetic viability. When does it become too small not to bother? With all of the new studies in genetics, it's hard to say how low a population can go, and you can bring back. As it gets less diverse, you wind up with them not being able to respond in time. With other species, like the little golden cheek warbler, they need a specific thing. They need ash juniper bark to make their nest. They're picky. Well, sometimes being picky makes them endangered when they lose that one piece. Or one of the reasons that we work with ranchers to try and restore the native clump grasses back into that Bermuda or the coastal feed grain or exotic grass that they're using is so its nest can survive, that little dickcissel. So sometimes it's not just, well, I've got grass. Well, you got to have a kind of grass that can be used. So a lot of our work as volunteers is to help with communication, education, taking kids out into nature, getting them to appreciate it, because if the kids don't appreciate it, then when we're gone, they won't care. And I hike all the time. I hike kids in the wood who I basically refer to some groups as my little cement children, because they've never been off cement. And when you take a child off cement, start walking them on grass, they kind of are okay. But when you start walking them into the woods, it's like, well, I don't know about this. And I go, look, I'm an old woman. I'm still alive. And usually you can shame little boys into going with you. But yeah, they kind of look at you like, what's in there? And of course they see TV and they think there's, lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. And I go, no, probably the scariest thing you're going to run across is an armadillo. And they leap and tend to frighten you. Any other questions? But yeah, genetic diversity would depend upon the species. And is anyone interested? Remember the horned lizard. Is anyone interested? Or the lesser prairie chicken. You got to have people interested. And that's one of our major jobs is you're all interested, you're here. Now you got to make 10 other people interested. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
For wildlife conservation, how does the United States compare with other nations?
Conserving what?
Well, conserving what is there and what's there.
I don't have the rankings, but you have to think of things like our land mass versus China's land mass. Well, odds are China has more land that isn't populated yet, but they went through and moved entire towns so that they could flood it and make a dam and have the water resource. They just moved people. They just picked them up and moved them. So we don't do that, but we still have our water damming up here has more to do with flood control than it does it doubles as drinking water. Where we rank, Brazil's burning its forests. Africa kind of going under too, but different areas of Africa, you treat Africa as one whole or each little, portion. So I don't know how you would ever make a good ranking. We are at least having a discussion about it, climate change, all those things. We have environmental impact studies now. Before that, it was pretty much how much money could you make? Yes.
I would just like to add on, I think that the difference for us and everyone else is that we have the resources and the ability to do something. We're in the organization, so we shouldn't even compare ourselves in. We should try harder because it's getting ridiculous.
Yeah, you need to lead sometimes. You can't say to a third world country, no, stay in your tent. That's the whole thing with China is you can't say to them, well, no, don't burn coal because we did too much. It's issues like that they're so complex. Yes, ma'am, in the back.
Well, luckily, we had a forward-thinking president about 100 years ago that set aside a lot of land for national forests and things like that. So luckily, we do have that heritage.
It was kind of nice in that one little video, since they're running the Roosevelt series on PBS, to have, and Franklin. But we were in a big drought. Remember, if you've ever watched the series, that drought wasn't just in Texas. The loss of farmland that went all the way through, the Dust Bowl years. We've learned to farm better. And we're teaching the better farming techniques in third world countries. So if you go out, it's being taught so that they won't fall into the same trap we did of over farming. Any other questions, or you going to give them their 5 minutes back? Oh, we've only got 4, 3.5 now. She was good because I told her, man, I'm up against the wire. I've timed it and timed it. So did I answer enough questions for you? Give you enough to think about? Did I connect that geology to something solid? Okay, thank you. You were great.